Welcome to the Audio Description Narrators of America Know Your Narrator series. Today, we are very honored to have Fred Brack, who is the webmaster for the ADP, the Audio Description Project. Thanks for joining us, Fred.
My pleasure, Roy.
Yeah, this is very exciting to have you here because of your many experiences, both personal and professional, within the world of audio description. Could I ask you to introduce yourself to the audience, some of your background and experience with audio description?
Sure, be happy to discuss that briefly because I don't want to bore anybody, but I really got started, I guess, back in college, and for some reason, as a freshman, I was attracted immediately to the college radio station, and that seemed like it would be fun, and I got very heavily involved in the radio station. I often have said I attended the radio station in my curricular activity with my college courses, and I just loved everything about it. I loved being on the air. I loved doing commercials and promos, and people told me I had a good voice for it, and I worked hard to get rid of my Boston accent at the time. and then when I graduated, I had to set all of that aside for 31 years until I retired from IBM. I didn't really have any opportunity to use my voice, and when I retired, my wife said, my wife, by the way, is blind, and she's been blind for as long as I've known her. We've been married for 46 years. And she said, look, you do audio description for me all the time, and I heard this guy named Joel Snyder coming to town, and he's going to teach a course on how to be an audio describer. You ought to go, So I went, and since 1999, the last 20 years, I have been an audio describer with Arts Access in Raleigh. And I got involved in what I'm doing now by attending a Kennedy Center meeting where they tried to resurrect a group called Audio Description International. And to fast forward on that, I became the webmaster there, and then Joel Snyder proposed that the American Council of the Blind take that project over, and so we moved it over to their servers and renamed it the Audio Description Project. So I've really been doing the website since 2003, but it's since 2010 under the auspices of the ACB.
Has anything really changed in 10 years on that website?
Well, if you look back to 2003 when I started, my big challenge then was finding out what the fourth or the fifth audio described audio DVD in history might be. Wow. Because back in those days, not only were there very few, I'm talking 0 to 3 a year, but they didn't put the fact they had audio description on the back cover. This didn't start for some years after that. And I had a really tough time finding them. In about 2005 or so, we may have gotten up to 10 or something like that. And it didn't really change till we got up to about 2012, when it started, some of the studios started committing to putting audio description in there, and it began to jump. But in those early years, just finding anything that was described was a challenge, and it was really the time when I was forming the basis of the website to be everything about audio description that I could find, and not doing a very good job at finding actual DVDs. There were no streaming services back then, of course, so that was a real challenge. Things changed once the studios started doing this, and then once the streaming services started coming out, everything changed dramatically, and my challenges today are dramatically different than they were back with just getting websites started and trying to make it pretty and make sure that people who are blind could read it well with their screen readers.
And with all those elements that you just mentioned, it's also grown from those 2 or 3 DVDs to, at least at the time of us recording this, we're well over 4,000 titles.
Yeah, well, we have 1,270 DVDs, that all of which are still available from 1997 through today, and we're recording this in late May 2020, and we have almost 4,200 described titles listed on the pride and joy of the Audio Description Project, the Master AD list. My biggest challenge to maintain that, but that's where you go to find out hey, did anybody ever do audio description for this, as well as is this series recorded, or where can I find Bob's Burgers these days, or whatever. So yeah, that's primarily driven today by the streaming services, but in that list of titles, 1,270 of them are DVDs, because they're still being produced.
It seems like there's a lot of questions about, at least from our audiences, there's two different perspectives, either on the mandate of requiring audio description, for example, the broadcast requirements for the FCC, as well as the streaming services who aren't necessarily required but are still opting into it. Can you talk anything about that? It seems like one's the carrot and one's the stick.
Well, I would say the most frustrating time that I ever lived through in the world of audio description was when the FCC mandated audio description on the broadcast and non-broadcast networks, and then some people, let's just say, some people in organizations sued and said, you don't have the right to do that. And it took Congress 8 years, I think it was, to resolve that and finally give the FCC the official mandate. Fortunately, there were some stations which continued to provide the audio description that they started providing in the early 2000s. And then, of course, once the mandate was in place, they did comply much better, and it's been going fairly well. And recently, we have seen quite a boost in the amount of audio description available. The FCC is taking this more seriously. They have a proposal out right now to increase the number of markets that it must be provided in from 60 to 100. And they're taking more responsibility and more interest, and they're forming committees of which the ACB has membership. But yeah, that's just part of the challenge. The streaming services have no mandate. And that's part of the problem. It's only a mandate for some broadcast, the most popular broadcast and non-broadcast networks. It's been a fight, if you will, with the streaming services, and kudos goes to the early ones, Apple's iTunes and Netflix, for jumping in there and saying, okay, we'll do it. And we had some negotiations with Netflix, but they worked out well. We're currently still in negotiation with Hulu, and we're trying to negotiate with HBO. And as you know, HBO Max just came out yesterday and does not have audio description, but I'm sure they will eventually. So it's an uphill battle. Kudos to Disney. When they came out with Disney Plus, they had 300, and they have almost 600 today. They're pumping them out. They're doing back description for 1931 classics that they have on their service and stuff like that. Apple TV Plus is a very small streaming service, but everything they do is original, and everything they do has audio description in 9 languages. So that's a really important contribution also that should be recognized.
When you look at those streaming services that are outside of the mandate, it sounds like there's been some informal maybe negotiations, but is there any speculation, any idea why they're doing it?
Well, there's a lot of pressure, I think, on companies in general, through things like so-called Section 508 and the Americans with Disabilities Act. And one of the arguments is, well, the Americans with Disabilities Act says you will provide access, but you're not, And I think to an extent, that's how the movie theaters began providing the service, and the FCC got involved with them and mandated that they had to provide it after a certain date, provided they had digital equipment and things like that. So you get some mileage out of that. You have suits that are actually filed by individuals and organizations, and that's how some of this has come about. The Bay State Council of the Blind had a suit against one of these companies, or is leading the efforts there, filed by individuals who are members, and it's it's kind of a response to the public pressure that comes in various ways. It's not just the government, it's not just Congress, it's not just the ACB, but the ACB is going after these larger streaming services one by one and saying, look, this is the expectation. And that's what we're trying to build. I mean, if you think about it, it's a little unfair that if you're deaf, you can get closed captioning on just about everything. But if you're blind, it's hit or miss, what you're going to get. So the problem is not solved until audio description is as common as captioning is.
Oh, that's great to know. One of the things that comes up a lot on the ADP site, when I go to ADP, it's anytime I have a question about audio description, that's the first place I go. And I'm curious, just because you have that unique overview that you've got all these different moving parts within the world of audio description. Is there anything maybe behind the scenes story that you can share about what you do as webmaster that you can share with our audience about something unique about audio description that maybe some people don't know or might be assuming differently?
Well, I will tell you, this is kind of an anecdotal story, and it's a long story that I'll make very brief. I spend more time trying to get the master AD list, the one which lists every single title, to not have duplicates than anything else. You would not believe all the variations that there are of the same title. Sometimes it's the punctuation, sometimes it's capitalization, sometimes it's Roman numerals versus Arabic numbers. I just had one last week. There was I don't remember the name of the movie, but we'll say it was The Muppets. And it was The Muppets. And then they had a second one, and they called it The Muppets 2 with Roman numeral 2. When they came out with number 3, it was a Roman numeral. It was Arabic 3. And so some companies say, oh, well, we're going to continue and we're going to use the Roman numerals, or they're all slightly different. And not all, hundreds of title changes that I have to catch programmatically. It's just amazing how much. One of the companies sends me titles, and some of them are from an Australian database, and they spell certain words like mum differently, M-U-M versus M-O-M. And I have to catch that to put it out there and to make it match everything else. So that's just kind of an anecdotal what keeps me up at night, trying to make this list as useful as possible by having a single line. I think one of the most exciting things about audio description and where the potential lies is something we have said before, and it always continues to fail, but we know it's going to succeed someday, and that is the idea of taking the audio description track and making it available separately and downloadable to people. And in the United States, this is done differently in different companies. Different countries have different services, and there have been at least 3 here in the United States that have tried it and failed. But the current one is called Spectrum Access. It just came online this month. It is a reincarnation of ActiView, which was a great idea, but it was very difficult in a very small company for somebody to get all of the licenses cleared to be able to get the audio description tracks from the companies who were very protective of them. So Charter Communications, which owns the Spectrum brand, took this over, and they're used to dealing with these studios and licenses all the time, as opposed to poor old Alex, who came in from the side and says, I'd really like to do this, and it was a tremendous challenge. So when they came out with their app, they came out with 370 titles that we have downloadable audio description tracks for. And one of the things we find is that some spouses, not me, don't want to listen to audio description when their spouse is blind. And so one of the things this does is let a person put a set of earphones on and just listen to audio description on their own. The other thing is you could if it doesn't work yet for Spectrum Access, but the goal is to be able to get those tracks immediately for new movies and let you go and bring your own equipment in there. Because you talk to people who are blind that have had to go into the theater, borrow equipment, and it doesn't work, or the batteries die in the middle, or it's staticky or whatever. So I think the future of audio description is going to be a BYO approach where you can download your audio description track onto your own device, bring your own earphones, whether it's your living room, your friend's house. You know, people go to somebody else's house, they don't want to hear the description either. So this is wonderful, and I think it's very important about the future. Now, there is another piece of the future, which I'll probably get a funny expression from you on, and that is, what is going to be the question of synthetic voice in audio description. Netflix is trying it. I don't know if anybody else is doing it. There are at least 2 shows on Netflix that have a synthetic voice. And what this really means is the audio describer, the person who writes the script, gets this script fed into a synthesizer, and out the other end comes a person speaking, and then the audio engineer, the third part of the triumvirate that produces audio description, integrates that voice into the movie. And the problem, as you well know, is expression and the understanding of the nuances of the human voice that is necessary to be used as the action changes. You don't use the same voice to say she died as you do the door blows open in a big explosion. And I suspect that over time, just like the voice for Siri or Alexa, which are really very good and expressive, I think over time, we will probably figure out how to encode the audio description to put these nuances in there. Will it ever be as good as Roy Samuelson? No, it won't be. But I think there's going to be a lot more experimentation there, just like we have assembly lines replacing human workers. There's going to be a lot of effort put out there. Right now, it's not very well accepted by the blind community. So it's going to be a matter of complaints about saying, I don't like it, you haven't captured it, you're not doing it fairly, you may be doing it cheaper, but you're not doing it fairly. But I suspect there's going to be a lot more effort on that in the future. It will improve, and the question is, will it improve enough, and will people use it, and will people accept it?
Gotcha. And it's a great point that you bring up, that nuance can be programmed, and it's regardless of it being a human narrator or a synth narrator, it's still something to program and put the emphasis or put the emotional nuance in. There's still someone doing it if it's not a narrator. There's still, and maybe it will come to the point where it's programmed. And one of the things that excites me the most about synth voice is that it gives even more access to programs that might never have audio description. So in that sense, great. And
that's very true. I think we have to assume the interest is that it's cheaper. I mean, there are a lot of people doing audio description these days, or who want to get into audio. I meant to say audio narrate. Well, there are a lot of audio describers, but audio narration. There are a lot of voice artists that are getting into it. There are a lot of people who want to get into it. So it all depends on, are you willing to pay for the best, And I have to say, perhaps I should jump in at this point and say, recently, a show that I listened to with my wife that's been on for a long time has had a change in audio narrators. And I really don't like the new narrator, because I actually took lessons from a professional voiceover artist when I thought I might want to get into the career. And there's a lot there's a lot to learn about controlling your voice, as you know, and there's a lot to learn about nuance and timing and things like that. And this particular audio narrator has the bad habit of emphasizing every syllable and every word, and it really doesn't sound very good, and it comes out like this, and it just really annoys me. And so I really appreciate the high quality narration that I hear from you, Roy, and from people like Tansy Alexander, who have been around forever. And recently, I heard Bill Larson do Money Heist, and they're really good. A quality narrator makes such a difference, and it's the control of the voice. That's what it's really all about, and it's why the studios need to be hiring professional voiceover artists.
And it sounds like with that professional focus that there's also some other links in the creation of audio description. You had mentioned earlier about closed captioning, that having it has been very consistent, overall.
Yes.
At least where we are now, that with audio description, it's basically a fully produced audiobook to time, and that there's other elements in addition to the narrator. Specifically, you and I had previously talked about the writer and how that contribution is the core of allowing our audiences who listen to audio description to fully immerse themselves in the story being told. That if there's something that sticks out, that's going to take you out of the emotional experience that the sighted people have the advantage of. So there's the narration, which we've talked about, the writing, the engineering, the how loud it is, the timing of the placement of the script, and all these elements. Any one of them, if it's a weak link, that can affect the performance. Am I making too many assumptions here, or is that?
No, you're right. There are a lot of elements here, and it's interesting because you remind me of the fact that some of the broadcast networks and some of the streaming services integrate the audio description in full Dolby whatever, okay? And some of them don't. And this is becoming an issue. And you can't simply say, well, I mean, the person's blind. What difference does it make whether it's only coming out of one speaker? They're getting this additional information.
Wow.
The point is, you want to be treated like everybody else. And in a sense, a blind person has an even greater appreciation of anything to do with sound. They depend so much on it. And when you don't give me the full Dolby treatment like you would give on the main audio track, you're cheating, if you will. And there's some stubbornness on at least one of the major streaming services on this, and I don't really know why it's there. So this gets back to the role of the audio engineer, although I will say the volumes, what do they call it? When you duck sometimes you have to duck the main audio to get the describer in there, and matching that voice with the sounding is getting a lot better. In the past couple of years, it's really improved in that area. So we need to just continue, just like we're getting more and more audio description, we need to continue the technical improvement, and you should have a soundtrack that comes out with audio description that is just as professional sounding, just as high quality as it is if you're listening to the main track. That's what we need to get to.
Oh, that's great to hear. And it sounds like those elements, specifically what you're talking about with the engineering, the levels, that is quality, that is a level of value that our audiences deserve, and that interrupts that, if I could, the race to the bottom, that, instead of cutting corners left and right, that it's like, oh, here's a way that our audiences really value. And it's let's bring that value in the same way that that sighted people get an advantage like that.
It seems to me that particularly for the streaming services, which depend on you paying a subscription fee, or like in the case of Apple, iTunes, making a purchase from them, the size of the population of people who are blind and have other visual impairment is huge. And if they're left out and they say, why do I want to watch this without description? Those businesses are missing a lot. They pay X dollars to audio describe something, but the potential for new customers is many more times that. We were just had a discussion last night in a steering committee meeting about the fact that CBS had just gone back and done the Sunday night at the movies in the months of March. And there's two things I'd like to say about that. First is, I believe that all of the movies they showed were Paramount Studios movies. And last year, Paramount Studios went back and added audio description tracks to 200 or more of their older movies. And then they released those to all of the streaming services. And that's how you got audio description for Forrest Gump and for the other series that were on there that didn't otherwise have audio description. So kudos to Paramount for doing that. And the other thing is that just the fact that that's now available is absolutely huge. Somebody said they watched, I don't remember which one it was. I'll say it was Titanic. I know they watched Titanic, but when they first saw Titanic, and this was a blind couple, they said they watched it in a movie theater, and they could not believe when they watched this a couple of weeks ago how much more they got out of it with the audio description. They never knew what was going on in those quiet passages, and it was just a dramatic improvement to them. So to be able to provide this is fantastic and is a marvelous incentive to people who are blind, who shun going to theater, the movie theaters, to live theater. They don't want to watch TV shows that don't have audio description. What an appeal to them now to pay the $5, $7, $10, $15 a month or whatever to be able to hear stuff that they would have liked to have heard in the first place, and watching something new to hear all of the description. It's just huge. So we're headed very much in the right direction. Technologically, we're heading in the right direction in terms of the amount of description, and we need everybody to step up to the plate and make sure that everything new has description. If you're going to put closed captioning in it, get it described.
Oh, that's so exciting to hear. And I can imagine there's two elements to your experience, both personally and professionally, that, who knows, maybe ADP in a year or so will now start listing the shows that don't have it, because that would be easier for you.
Yeah, that would be nice if that was a smaller list, isn't it?
And the other thing that comes to mind is, as a spouse to a person who is blind, that this brings you and your wife a connection that you might not necessarily have. Either you're taking the time to share the description with your wife while you're watching it as well, that can take you out. That now that experience, maybe I'm making an assumption, has that experience changed for you and your wife when you watch a movie together or a TV show?
Well, let me say this. Every now and then, if we're going to go look for a show on Netflix or Prime Video, for example, we essentially only consider something that's audio described. Now, we had the unfortunate situation recently during this coronavirus lockdown where my son had been beating us up for years and saying, I can't believe you never watched Breaking Bad. You need to watch it. So we watched Breaking Bad, and a month after we finished it, Netflix releases audio description tracks for it.
Oh, the timing.
The timing. But the point I want to make is this. When I am with my wife and watching something which isn't audio described, which is now the lesser of the time period, I will drift off and forget that I'm supposed to be describing to her. And I will just get into the movie and watching it, and she'll say, what's happening? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, that was a car. It was coming down the road, and these guys attacked it from the side. And, so I forget. But the joy of having the audio description, and this, of course, comes because I am an audio describer, is watching with her with the description and hearing a describer voice a narrator voice a particularly ingenious or inventive or salient expression or the use of a word, and I'll all of a sudden just say right out loud, oh, that's a neat way to say that. I'm learning from that process, or hopefully I'm learning from it. And so I really enjoy watching the shows and listening to the description. I'm getting a lot more out of them. I mentioned The Mandalorian. I'm a Star Wars fan. They were telling me so much about Star Wars in there because any Star Wars fan would know the terminology, and I didn't. And the describer was just using it, in the script that they wrote. And so I got a lot more out of it that way. But I enjoy hearing good description. I enjoy hearing good audio narration, and I learn from it.
Wow. This is such a great conversation. We've covered so much. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about yet as far as where you see audio description headed? I think you've covered so many great points. Is there anything else that maybe we haven't talked about yet?
Well, there's a lot of talk about cord cutting these days. There's a lot of talk about DirecTV, for instance, isn't being marketed anymore because they've gone to just the streaming solution. It's only being marketed to people in rural areas right now. So, and so many people have cut the cable on DirecTV and Dish and other streaming services. I'm sorry, not streaming services, but the providers that provide TV services only. And everybody's going to internet-based stuff and streamers. So clearly we're seeing a reduction in that old style. It's like going from 8 tracks to cassettes to CDs to, I don't buy CDs anymore now. I mean, and I've got some vinyl over there too. So I've lived through 5 generations of audio media, and now you just get it through the internet. It's all streaming based. And I think that's where we're headed in the future. Everything will come streaming there. You'll get an internet service. You'll need some way to get that, whether it's by satellite or by fiber cable or copper cable or over the air or satellite service or whatever. But everything is headed towards streaming. And so everything that's streamed needs to have audio description. I think that's where we're headed.
Oh, that's great to hear. Oh, thanks so much for this. If people want to get a hold of you either on social media or your website, can you give some of the handles that you could share?
Well, the Audio Description Project is an initiative of the American Council of the Blind, and we run as a sub-site off of their servers. So I tell everybody, just remember acb.org, and if you can't, what was that? That was American Council of the Blind, acb.org/ADP, which stands for Audio Description Project. If you can't remember, just type audio description into your favorite search engine, and we'll be the first listing there after you get through any commercial listings, advertisements or whatever. But we're always at the top because we have so many pages that are high use. So it's acb.org/ADP. We also have a presence on Facebook. Just search for Audio Description Project, and Twitter. The same thing, search there. I use those 2 media primarily to announce everything that's new DVDs, new movies, anything from the streaming services, and that's coming up to about 25 a week right now.
Wow.
So by the end of the week, I've amassed a collection of announcements that cover about 25. So if you want to find out the new things as fast as possible, you should subscribe to one of those too. And if you need to get in touch with me, there's a link at the bottom of every page on the ADP website that says Contact Webmaster. That's me. So that would be how to reach me.
If I could jump on that, what are some messages that you love to get on that email? What are some things that you really appreciate getting from our audiences?
Well, every now and then I'll get word from somebody that I missed a DVD. I just got that this week. It hasn't happened in a long time. But what it really was is not something new. It was things that were only available when they were released in 2019 on Blu-ray, and now in January they came out with the DVD version. So I was able to go back and modify the website and say, but if you want the DVD-only version, here's a link to it. I had a fellow whose name I can't remember now. For a number of years, he would go to all of these stores like Best Buy or whatever, and he'd thumb through the DVD pile of stuff that was, $2, the $2 bin. And every now and then he'd come up with something that I had never heard of before. And so I was able to add those. We haven't had any of those old ones anymore, but I always appreciate it when somebody gives me feedback. I don't get feedback on errors typically, but I tell you, nothing bothers me. I'm a perfectionist. I don't like a comma out of place on the website. I don't like misspelled words, and that's why I worked so hard on getting all of those movie titles the same. So I like to hear from somebody who says, "Oh, by the way, this link doesn't work." And I've got thousands of links on the website, so something's going to break. So I appreciate feedback like that. And every now and then we'll get feedback from somebody who say they've discovered something and it's been so appreciated to them that they didn't know about this. And recently I've been giving Zoom call or conference call presentations to user groups of whose participants are blind. And they've asked me to present information on the streaming services and other ways to get audio description. And I'm getting excellent feedback from that. People don't know about these things. And that's one of the problems, spreading the word. Because if a person becomes adventitiously blind through some retina problem or diabetes or an accident or whatever, they can tend to withdraw into a shell. Say, well, I don't go to theater anymore because I don't get anything out of it. And they've never heard of audio description, and they're in a family that everybody else is sighted and they don't know about it, and they just kind of leave you alone. So it's really good to spread the word about audio description. And if people point to the audio description project, then you learn everything you could want to know about audio description, where it is in your town. Look it up on the performances, the theaters section, or the museums, or if you're going traveling, to Chicago or New York or Kiowa, Iowa, try to look up a museum and see, is there a museum there that has audio described tours or whatever? And a lot of them actually have virtual tours. I've been putting a couple of those up this week now, so you don't even have to leave your home to take a tour of the museums. So those things are very valuable. But it's spreading the word to the people who could really benefit, which is something that is really worthy to do if you know about our site and you know somebody who could benefit from it.
Oh, and thanks so much for all your efforts on getting that word out and educating and everything that you've shared in this conversation, and the more that are going to be coming.
Great.
Thanks for being a part of this, Fred.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Roy.